Probably most of all my looming deadline for my PhD.
Where do I start?
The impacts of climate change I think about during the day. I don't think about it during the night.
Well, to be honest, it's pretty scary.
If we continue burning fossil fuels as we are, then we're in for an inhospitable planet, really.
With the amount of energy that we're actually retaining within the Earth system at the moment, it's definitely problematic to say the least.
I think that we're going to start to see in the coming decades quite big changes that are going to have really real consequences. It's not just some abstract thing that people are looking at in the lab.
I think climate change is like a big experiment on our planet where it's going around normally and we've just whacked it. And it's interesting to see how the Earth will respond to this perturbation.
Only because you don't know every single detail doesn't mean that we don't know enough to have an idea what is happening.
We know what we are doing to the climate system by emitting more carbon dioxide.
Ice is melting really rapidly around Antarctica and in Greenland. These slabs of ice sit on the landmass, and when you melt them, they raise the sea level immediately. And the rate of warming that we get over the planet is higher at the poles. So just where we want the ice to stay, we're seeing the most rapid warming, especially in the northern hemisphere. So this is a big one. This is going to transform the world's continental outlines, all the coastal regions that are highly developed. We live by the coast for a whole number of reasons, and these areas of high development and high populations are going to in time become uninhabitable if sea levels rise from ice melt to the extent where we're seeing. If this goes on for the next few centuries, ice melt will be big enough to, will be rapid enough to change sea levels by many meters, and that's enough to displace tens of millions of people worldwide.
The human impact, how people are going to cope, whether they'll be relocated, whether they'll be hurt by climate change. That's the stuff that really scares me.
There's lots of things that keep me up at night. In terms of my research, it's certainly the fact that we will be seeing more extreme events in the future. As I said, I look at heat waves, so they're meant to increase in their intensity and duration and their frequency as well. So that kind of worries me that we're not doing enough to prepare and even mitigate the changes in those events.
There's a lot of climate impacts that people worry about. I think one that I've studied that I think is actually worse than people have thought is just simple heat stress. So when you see a 46-degree day in Sydney, that's the sort of thing that one day will be a 47 or 48 or 49-degree day, and it gets to be pretty serious, actually.
I think climate change is clearly having big impacts on Australia, and we can see that in terms of extreme temperatures in particular. We're seeing many more warm extreme records than cold extreme records these days, several times more. And Australia is really on the front line, I think, and that's my main concern.
Some of my recent work has been looking at the record temperatures we had in Australia during the summer of 2012 and 2013. And so, for example, I have a presentation that I give quite regularly, and I have a photo that I put up, and that has a picture of a family in Tasmania who were sheltering from a bushfire that had swept through their town. And I actually had to stop putting that picture up because every time I was giving a scientific talk and I'd turn around and look at it, it would make me quite teary. So just thinking about those kind of impacts that we're going to see in Australia in terms of the work I do, increases in heat waves and hot summers and bushfire risk.
Probably the thing I find most scary is the changes happening on the other end of the planet in the Arctic. So there's been a lot of coverage of the declines in Arctic sea ice, and obviously if you have less white ice, you're not reflecting as much sunlight to outer space, and then so you've got more dark ocean absorbing sunlight, so things warm up more, then you melt more ice, you get more absorption, it gets hotter, and it just goes in this loop. And I guess the thing that keeps me up at night is the fact that we may have, or probably already have, lost control of the climate system to some degree, that once these positive feedbacks get going, even if we stop emitting emissions, we've set these things in motion, and we're locked into a certain amount of warming no matter what. So that's probably the thing that scares me the most.
One of the key concerns are the potential climate change feedbacks that we don't have a good quantitative handle on.
So like carbon cycle feedbacks associated with things like the mobilisation of the currently stored carbon in ecosystems at high latitudes. So there's a lot of carbon stored in those ecosystems that could be transferred from there to the atmosphere. And that's one of the things that the climate models more or less don't really take into account. And so the projections that we hear about that are concerning enough in and of themselves don't include a lot of these sort of slow feedbacks associated with ecosystem responses to climate change. And so that's one of the really big wildcards, I guess.
Other things that keep me awake are, bugs in my code, which are quite trivial, and telling my kids one day that I'm sorry that I couldn't provide a better world for them.
As far as what we're in for, I know that kind of makes it sound like we don't have a choice in the matter, and we do.